Thank you everyone for being here today. And I just want to start out by saying that we're at a really interesting moment in education and research. One that's full of new possibilities, but also full of very important questions, some of which I want to address today. And with all the hype and excitement around generative AI, at least for me, it's very easy to focus on the tools and what they do and forget to ask some deeper questions. And that's what today is about. This presentation, what I normally do is I do walkthrough of AI tools, but this presentation is not that. This presentation is an invitation to reflect, to hold up a mirror and think critically about how generative AI is reshaping educational research and what that means for all of us. So with that in mind, let's jump in. So I want to start out with a question. Is generative AI helping us understand education more deeply, or is it just shifting how knowledge gets created and who gets to create it? Think of it as holding up a funhouse mirror. It doesn't just reflect what's there, it warps it, right? So I think of generative AI in the same way. Sure, it speeds up things and makes a lot of things a lot easier to do, but it also has the potential to amplify existing biases, widening access gaps, and this raises big questions about how we know what we know. And to really make sense of all this, we kind of need to zoom out for a second and think about the bigger picture, where we are right now and how we got here. So let's just start there for a moment. So over the past 5 years, education has been a whirlwind. First, we have the pandemic, which pushed us to rely on tech in ways that we hadn't before. And then came the explosion of generative AI. Tools like ChatGPT didn't just show up, they kind of burst into the scene. And I don't think a lot of people were prepared for that. And it landed us in a space that was already stressed and stretched quite thin. And as a result, people have mixed feelings, right? Some folks see generative AI as this revolutionary game changer. It can make research more accessible, take over some of the repetitive stuff, and free up time for deeper thinking. Others, however, are understandably more skeptical. They worry it's weakening critical thinking, it's spreading bias, or making us question what's actually real or original in our work. But here's the lens I want us to use today. What if generative AI isn't just the tool that we use? What if we think of it as a mirror, one that reflects what we value in academia, like speed and originality or inclusion, one that shows us where we're falling short, and one that maybe reveals some of our more deeper fears about the future of education and research. So in this presentation, I want us to hold up that mirror and ask, what is generative AI showing us? And just as importantly, what it's showing us be distorting? Now, AI isn't exactly new. It's been around for decades. And it's gone through waves of hypes and disappointments. But generative AI, I feel, it's a very different story. It really took off after the breakthrough in 2017, something called transformers, and that changed the game. So if you think of older AI, they usually just crunch numbers and sort data. But generative AI actually creates stuff like essays and codes and even what sounds like original ideas. And companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and Google, they are racing ahead quite fast. So here's what's on my mind right now. ChatGPT or GPT technology can write essays right now, but it won't be long before it can do a lot more than that, like independently polling research, summarizing it, and even offering critical analysis from a specific perspective. And that's not really science fiction anymore. There are tools that do that today. So, yes, there's a lot of hype, but the momentum is real too. And at the moment, and the amount of money that and attention that goes into this technology, I sincerely doubt that generative AI is going to fade, or people say it's a trend that it will fade. I'm not really convinced that's going to be the case. It's already changing how knowledge is made and how we decide what counts as valid or meaningful knowledge. So, if we want to seriously critique generative AI, we've got to start with a shared way of understanding and talking about it. So here's how I'd like to break it down in terms of AI and generative AI. So traditional AI was more like a judge. Think Turnitin, right? So it checked for words and flagged things. But generative AI is different because it creates. And that blurs the line between what's original and what's borrowed or reassembled. And large language models, the tech behind ChatGPT, are trained on massive amounts of data, and some of it's great. Some of it, though, not so much great. So when these tools generate something, they're pulling from that whole messy mix. The results can be very impressive, but also kind of fuzzy in terms of where it came from and how trustworthy it is. And now we're seeing even more powerful tools. I think many of you might be familiar with Notebook LM that can read your PDF, watch videos, scan your emails, and then try to summarize or answer questions based on all that. It's super powerful. But here's the question I keep constantly ask myself. When we start using these tools for research, what are we losing? What gets flattened or simplified when deep, messy ideas are squeezed into a quick chatbot reply? And what I'm truly trying to say here is that you don't really have to be an engineer to understand all this stuff. But if you're a researcher, any kind of researcher, then understanding how these tools work and how they shape knowledge, I don't think that's optional. I think it's our ethical responsibility to understand this. So we've all seen how fast generative AI has taken off. But before we dive into how researchers are actually using it or start listing the pros and cons, I think we need to take another very big step back. Because in educational research, the question isn't just does it work? It's about frames of minds, right? So a decade ago, Patrick Supes made this point really clear. In educational research, probably any kind of research, theory matters. And it's not just background noise. It shapes the questions we ask, the methods that we choose, and how we make sense of things. So that's why we can't really afford to approach generative AI without a solid theoretical lens. If we only look at what it can do and all the hype, without thinking about the bigger picture, we risk ending up with a pretty shallow understanding of things. Yes, generative AI is a tool. Everyone is saying that, and that's ubiquitous across literature. But it's not like SPSS is a tool or Mendeley is a tool or even Google Scholar is a tool. It's a tool that actually pushes back. It challenges some of our deepest assumptions about what research is and how we do it. So let's take a look at ontology for a second. That's about the nature of reality. If we're using generative AI to analyze qualitative data, can it really grasp human experience in a way an interpretivist research would? Or is it just doing high-level pattern recognition? And if we look at epistemology, that's how we know what we know. If generative AI um, is trained on biased data from the internet, which it is, can it ever give us something close to objective truth if you're doing research from a positivist lens? Or is it just reflecting all the noise and flaws from the data that it was trained on? And let's not forget, tools aren't neutral. They are built, or not all tools, but this particular tool isn't neutral. It's all GPT technology are built by companies, driven by market forces, shaped by political and economic interest. That influences what we prioritize, what voices they amplify, and which ones they leave out. So when we talk about theory, ontology, epistemology, that's not just academic jargon. This is the groundwork. It's what we have to engage with before we can responsibly assess what generative AI can and can't do in our field. So that's my foundation. I'm going to build on this as I move forward from the presentation. Let's talk about and explore some of the specific theoretical lenses and how we can guide our reflection of the use of generative AI from those perspectives. So the first lens I want to dive into is connectivism. And this one's closely tied to folks like George Simmons and Stephen Downes. So at its core, the idea is that knowledge doesn't just live inside our heads. It lives in a network that we built between people and ideas and resources, and yes, even tools, and that includes generative AI. So Simmons actually refers to these tools as non-human appliances. So in other words, learning isn't just about what we know, it's about how you connect with everything around you. So where does generative AI fit into all of this from this lens? Actually, pretty naturally. So tools like ChatGPT or Elicit or all the other tools out there, they can become powerful new nodes in a learner's network. They don't just deliver information, they help shape how learners explore and connect and build knowledge. So think about it for a moment. A tool that summarizes research or suggests a related idea is not just pulling facts, it's guiding how someone sees a topic, what connections they make, and where they go next. It's actively expanding their understanding. So from a connectivist perspective, using generative AI isn't about getting answers. It's about expanding and reshaping your learning network. And these tools can surface insights across disciplines and bring unexpected connections, or even offer new interpretations that the learner or the person within that network hadn't considered before. So here's some big research questions we should explore when generative AI is involved from a connectivist perspective. One is, how are learners actually using these AI tools? What happens to their learning networks when they interact with a chatbot or an AI research assistant or tutor? Are new connections being made? Are some being overlooked? Lang and Bai talk about the potential of these tools to create new dialogic spaces. So basically, new places where people and dialogue happen. And we need more research to really understand this. Are these tools helping learners connect knowledge in meaningful ways? That's the promise. Or are they sometimes flattening the complexity? That might be happening in reality. We don't know. The space is open. There's not a lot of research here, but more research is needed. And this is an invitation for people in the landscape to do the type of inquiry needed to answer the questions that I just posed. Okay, let's take a look at it. Look at this from another lens. So if we shift to critical pedagogy, um, which is deeply influenced by the work of Paulo Freire, we'll get a different perspective. This perspective sees education as inherently political. It's not just about passing on knowledge, it's about power, inequality, and the potential for education to help people recognize and challenge systems of oppression. So Freire famously critiqued what he called the banking model, and this is a really important term. It's the idea where students are treated like empty accounts and teachers just deposit knowledge onto them. And instead, he pushed for something much more transformative. Education for him should help learners develop critical consciousness, which is the ability to see injustice and feel empowered to change it. Okay, so what happens when we look at generative AI through this lens? Well, one of the first things that we need to recognize is that these tools are not neutral. I talked about this previously. Most of them are built by big tech companies in the global north. They're shaped by commercial goals, political systems, and cultural values that don't really reflect everyone's reality. So we have to ask, whose voices are being built into these systems and whose voices are being left out of these systems. And researchers like Nayaba and others are already digging into this. They talk about digital neocolonialism, and that's the idea that AI tools like lesson generators might assume access to tech, internet, or resources that are common in wealthy countries, but not everywhere. So even when the tools seem helpful, they can quietly reinforce inequalities or promote norms that don't fit other cultures or educational contexts. And Freire might even have called this a form of cultural invasion. And that's when the dominant ways of thinking replace or silent others. And instead of encouraging students to question the world, these tools can sometimes push conformity, even without really that being the intention of the people who designed the technology. So that's why critical pedagogy is so important here. It gives us a way to ask hard questions, um, necessary and hard questions. Who really benefits from these tools? So that's a question that we need to ask from this theoretical lens. Who owns the algorithms? Whose knowledge is being centered? And whose knowledge is being erased? So generative AI isn't just a fancy new assistant or tutor. It's a reflection of a deeper system of power. And if we want to use it responsibly in education, we have to be willing to look at it through this critical lens. So again, word of caution of people thinking about this technology as tutors or personalized way of interacting with students. From one theoretical lens, that might be a good thing. From another theoretical lens, there's a lot of caution, and that's what I'm trying to get at. I'm going to go to another lens, and this will be my third one, and I'll go on to the next section. The one I want to highlight here is social constructivism, which draws a lot of work, a lot from the work of Lev Vygotsky. So at the heart of this theory, is a very simple but very powerful idea. And that is that learning isn't just about soaking up information. It's something that we actively build through conversation, through collaboration, and cultural context. So learning happens with others, not in isolation. Okay, so where does generative AI fit in all of this? Well, tools like ChatGPT actually seem to line up with some of the ideas in social constructivism. They are conversational. They allow students to ask questions and push back and get clarifications and basically co-construct meaning in real time. And that's a lot closer to an active learning model than just reading a textbook or listening to a lecture. Some folks even suggest that AI tutors could offer personalized support, kind of like adaptive scaffolding. Adaptive scaffolding in AI is a big thing in the literature right now. And that just simply means helping learners work just beyond their current ability, right in the sweet spot. Vygotsky calls this zone of proximal development. But, and this is a big if, just because the potential is there doesn't mean it's always going to play out that way in practice. So, for example, Honing, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, research found something very surprising. So even when students were using an AI tutor that could support more active constructivist learning, many still preferred traditional approaches. Things like direct answers, clear instructions, or passive review. And those things are stuff that constructivists try to move away from. So this raises a really important question in this space from this lens. Even if the tech can support interaction and deeper thinking, could it ease the convenience? Could its ease and convenience actually lead us back to this old banking model that Frere warned us about? One where the tools become um, tools that just simply give information and students receive them without really much engagement. So that's why social constructivism is a very powerful and useful lens. It helps us see the possibilities as I just laid out, but it also reminds us that what really matters most is how these tools are being engaged. Just because we provide these tools that have the potential to interact doesn't mean that people are going to use them that way. So we need more research in real classroom studies, real learner voices to understand how generative AI is shaping learning in practice and not in theory. Okay. So I'm going to pull everything together. This is a map that I've been working on for the last 3 months now. This slide gives us a sort of a conceptual map, and it's designed to help us visualize how different theoretical lenses might shape or be shaped by the use of generative AI in research. And you'll notice the map lays out a spectrum of stances. So on one end, we have avoid, and in the middle, we have proceed with caution. And on the other end, we have reimagine with care, highlighted in green. And the idea isn't to say this is the right way or that is the wrong way. Instead, it's meant to show the various degrees of risk to research integrity, depending on the lens that you're working from. So I'll take critical race theory as an example. So from this perspective, the risks are significant. If you're using generative AI that's trained on racially biased data, that's a real danger of reinforcing stereotypes or completely ignoring non-Western ways of knowing. So if I'm doing critical race theory informed research with these tools, I constantly have to ask myself, how did I audit the AI output for racial equity? And if I haven't done that, I would really and seriously question whether the research I did, whether I can claim that the research I did has rigor or integrity. Now let's compare it with another lens. I'm going to take the one all the way in the bottom, so post-humanism. So in that view, AI isn't much of a threat. It's just another node in the network. It's a non-human agent that helps learners and researchers access information, make connections, and synthesize data. The main risk here isn't bias, like it was in critical race theory, but over-reliance. If people lean too heavily on AI, they might stop exploring other sources or building richer networks. But that's a risk that we can manage more easily with the right scaffolding than bias, which is in the training data. So the main point of this visual is to drive home one thing. And I want to emphasize this, and I would shout it out if I could, but I'll say it very carefully. Using generative AI in research is not theoretically neutral. Depending on your lens, the risk and the responsibilities change. So it's not like SPSS. It's not like Mendeley. Many people say they're tools. It's a tool. Yes, it's a tool, but it's not a theoretically neutral tool. And this map here, I've designed to help us think through some of those risks and recognize where the pressure points are and to figure out what kind of mitigations are needed. And looking ahead, I think this is where the field is going. As generative AI becomes more common, we won't just be able to say, yeah, I use generative AI for this bit and that bit. Our university requires disclosure. I don't think that's going to cut it. I think that we should expect people to explain how generative AI was used, how it interacted with our theoretical framework, what risks we identified, and what did we do to address them. So I think that's a bigger, better way than simply disclosing that generative AI was used in this paper or generative AI was used in this dissertation. And the level of reflection isn't just good practice. I think it's going to be essential for maintaining research integrity as this technology becomes more prevalent and more people start using it. So now I've talked about the theory, I'm going to shift to what's actually happening on the ground. Because generative AI isn't a future threat, it's something that is happening right now. It's already woven into our day-to-day work of researchers across disciplines. And the numbers are eye-opening. So even very early on, we're seeing a pretty solid uptake in generative AI and research. One survey from 2023 found that about 30% of scientists were already using generative AI to help academic papers. And in the analysis of almost 9,000 articles, generative AI, ChatGPT showed up in 70% of the AI use cases, and this was declared. So mostly for things like improving readability and fixing grammar. Interestingly, non-native English speakers and international research teams are also using these tools even more and for a wide range of tasks. So generative AI isn't just helping them polish, it's helping them bridge communication and language gaps as well. There are also estimates that even early 2023, generative AI may have played a role in about 10% of published abstracts. So how much is that? That's about 60,000 papers published that year. had at some level some help from these generative AI tools. So that's about 1% of the total global research output in just 1 year. Now, 1% might sound small, but when you put it into context, these tools had only been widely available for less than a year. And that kind of adaptation is incredibly fast for academia. So here's a takeaway from this. The data is showing us that generative AI is not a hype. It's here, it's being used. It's changing how a growing number of academics work. And that's why we need to understand how it's being used. Not just in terms of tools and features and the cool things it can do, but how it's shaping research practice, collaboration, and even publication norms. All right, so we're now at the heart of the discussion, the moment where we hold up that mirror I talked about and ask, what is generative AI reflecting back at us and about educational research? Because here's the tension is pretty real. On the one side, these tools are incredibly powerful and they're exciting and you can do a lot of good with them. On the other, they raise serious concerns that we just can't afford to ignore. So let's take a balanced look at both. The clear reflection would be the benefits, and the distortion, that would be the risks. So what I really want to emphasize is that generative AI doesn't just do things. It often amplifies what's already happening in our field. It shines a light on existing pressures that I mentioned earlier, like the constant push to publish, the demand to do more with less time. But at the same time, it introduces new ethical and methodological challenges that we haven't actually faced before. So it isn't about whether AI is helpful or harmful. It's about what it's revealing, what it's stretching, speeding up, or even warping. It's about how we think about and do research from this point moving forward. Okay, so let's talk about one of its biggest draws. I'll talk about a couple of benefits and a couple of risks and move forward. The biggest benefit, of course, is efficiency. So generative AI can make certain parts of the research process way faster. Things like drafting a section of a paper, scanning through mountains of literature, summarizing long articles. That's real time saved. And in theory, that freed up time could be used for deeper thinking or meaningful work. But as always, we have to ask, at what cost? Does moving faster mean we're cutting corners? Are we losing something in quality of our research when the process gets compromised? And beyond speed, there's also the creativity side of it. These tools can act almost like a brainstorming partner. They help us generate new ideas, think of hypotheses, or spot gaps that we might not have noticed. So in a sense, generative AI becomes a kind of like a critical friend, always ready to bounce some ideas around with you, especially during that early stages of a research project. And for some researchers, especially those who are working solo or under pressure, that kind of creative support can be a real game changer. So yes, the promise is here. And we'll come back to this later. It's not just about what generative AI can do. It's about how we're using it and what it's doing to our research practice in return. The other benefit that I want to highlight is democratization. So these tools have the potential to level the playing field in really meaningful ways. So for example, they can help non-native language speakers with things like grammar and clarity, which can be a major barrier in academic publishing. So if that support becomes widely available, it could help make global research more inclusive. There's also the possibility of cutting down the problematic practice of gift authorship. And that's a phenomenon where someone gets credit just for helping with basic editing. And it happens quite often. So instead, tools can handle these really low-level tasks, allowing everyone to focus more on the ideas and contribute to what really matters. And generative AI might help researchers communicate their work in more accessible ways, like turning dense findings into podcasts, like Notebook LM does, or a visual summary, or something that reaches people outside the academy. And that's a huge win for public engagement and knowledge sharing. Of course, all of this depends on access, right? If only well-funded institutions or researchers in certain regions have reliable access to these tools, then we're not really leveling the playing field at all. We're just shifting the imbalance. So democratization is possible, but is not guaranteed or automatic. The last benefit I'll talk about is innovation, and I'll talk about it in two ways. First, it's becoming a research subject on its own. So people are studying its societal impacts, the way it encodes bias, how users interact with it. It's a whole new landscape that's opened up, and I operate in this field, in this new landscape that has opened up. Second, it's sparking new research methods. So think of hybrid approaches that combine human intuition with AI-powered analysis, especially in areas like literature reviews or large-scale qualitative data. And also more broadly, it's focusing us to revisit really big questions in educations about how we teach, how we assess, what kind of skills do students need to learn in the age where these tools are prevalent. Let's talk about some of the risks. So the big one is, of course, hallucination. And that's a polite term for when generative AI makes things up, like citations and facts and quotes that sound real, but they actually aren't. And I'm guessing many of you have seen this in action. It's just really, really annoying. And it's also a very serious threat to scholarly integrity. There are technological efforts underway to reduce this, like something called retrieval augmented generation, otherwise known as a RAG. It's a step in the right direction, but the jury's still out on whether it really solved the problem. Now, even if hallucinations can be reduced, it still means that researchers need to manually verify everything that AI gives them. And that kind of cancels out a lot of the time-saving benefits that we talked about earlier. One of the other risks, of course, is the black box problem. We actually don't know how the AI is generating its answers. You can ask it the same questions twice and get totally different responses. And that kind of inconsistency makes research really hard to replicate. And in many domains, replication is the foundation of good science. So this lack of transparency is also a major issue. It shows us why we need more work on explainable AI, and that's the concept where systems can actually show us how they got from A to B. Because if we don't know how the tool works, how can we actually or fully trust or critically engage with what it produces? In the ethical landscape, kind of feels like a minefield right now. There are many, many issues. The most immediate concern, I think, for academics is academic integrity. So AI makes it a lot easier to cross the academic integrity lines or dishonesty lines, whether it's plagiarism, ghostwriting, or passing AI-generated work as your own. These are all breaches of academic integrity, and we're already seeing this. And if we've seen footprints of undeclared AI use slipping into published papers. I'm sure you've seen a couple. And in most cases, we're talking about fully fabricated data, which people use to write papers. And the thing is, the so-called detection tools out there, they don't actually work because they're unreliable, simply because they use generative AI to try to detect generative AI. In the back end, that's basically how the technology works, and they are unreliable. So there are many current trends among publishers that are, and we're seeing them moving towards mandatory disclosure. So if you use AI, you need to do say so. But even then, you, the human, are fully responsible for what you have produced with the AI. So AI can't be listed as your co-author, and it can't take credit or blame for the work. And I think many publishers have made that abundantly clear. Beyond authorship, there's a huge issue with data privacy. Using online AI tools come with a real risk. If you feed in sensitive or identifiable participant data, that info might get stored or even worse, be used to train some future models. And that's what people are calling privacy leakage. And we're seeing strong guidance around this one. I particularly like JAMA. You can just look that up. Um, has a set of recommendations on not to upload identifying viable data into AI tools, and be very cautious about using generative AI in manuscript preparation. And this isn't just best practice, it's an ethical issue. It's about protecting participants and uploading research ethics. All right, last set. Um, there is systemic bias. And the idea that generative AI can quietly reinforce the very inequities that we're supposed to be challenging in our research. We'll first talk about positionality. If we rely on a tool that's trained on biased data, how does that shape our perspective? How does it influence what we see or don't see in our findings? And there's a real risk here that marginalized voices or alternative viewpoints might be filtered out or distorted or even ignored entirely. And not because the researcher intends this, but because the tools they are using is already carrying that bias. This ties directly to a broader social and cultural bias that's built into generative AI. We know that these models are trained mostly on Western English-speaking internet data, and that means that they often reflect and even amplify harmful stereotypes. We've seen this play out in the early image generator that produced those really shockingly racist and sexist contents. If these tools, if we use these tools uncritically, we're not just producing biased research, we're potentially reinforcing the very system of inequity that we're trying to study. And if these findings go on to inform policy, the stakes even get higher. So last thing I'll mention here, there's also a linguistic bias that we need to acknowledge. So right now, generative AI works best in English. Languages with less digital content are really poorly supported, which means the researchers working in those languages are automatically at a disadvantage. And it's a very subtle but powerful way of reinforcing linguistic dominance. Some might even call this a form of digital imperialism. So again, it always comes back to intentionality. We need to be aware of what these tools bring with them and what they leave out. If we're not critically reflecting on them, we're doing harm even when we're trying to help. Okay, so how do we address using generative AI in our research. Let's zoom out a bit and see how all of this, the use of generative AI, can play in the entire research life cycle. So as you can see in this visual, generative AI offers advantages, but it also introduces risk. And it's not localized to a specific area. It's in every single stage of the process. And I want to break this down. So in the planning stage, generative AI can be super helpful for brainstorming. It can suggest research questions or hypotheses, which can work great for sparking ideas, but we also have to be very careful. It might just reflect popular patterns from its data, and that means that you can get ideas that feel innovative, but they're actually kind of derivative or biased in ways that aren't immediately obvious. So that positionality and reflexivity is really important here. During the literature review, the time-saving appeal is very, very strong. These tools can summarize articles or pull out themes very quickly. But here's the thing. Even if we eventually solve the hallucination and the citation problem, accuracy is still an issue. We can't really fully trust the summaries or the contribution the tool is making. Well, if we can't do that, then it undermines the very foundation of scholarship. So we have to go back, make sure that everything that we put on the paper is valid. For data connection, generative AI isn't really widely used just yet, but the technology is coming. There's potential for automating certain tasks, and that raises huge red flags around participant privacy and data security. At the very least, the minimum, we need to use AI models that run locally and are not connected to the internet. In data analysis, generative AI tools can spot patterns, whether you're working with text or numbers. But again, it's the black box is a real problem. If we don't know how the tool got its conclusion, how can we trust it? How do we know, or how can we make sure that it's not just reinforcing some algorithmic bias that it has in the data? Even in reflexivity, some people have suggested AI could offer alternative interpretations and challenge our thinking. Maybe. But the bigger risk is that it replaces genuine deep reflection and suddenly pushes us towards its own default patterns of interpretation, shaped again by its training. So finally, we have reporting and dissemination, and the benefits is very clear, especially for non-native speakers of English, or for turning research into more accessible format like summaries and visuals. But this is also the stage where issues like undeclared use of AI and non-replicability of AI-assisted output really comes into focus. So as you can see from this visual, it's not as simple as saying generative AI is being good or bad. It's about asking what tasks are we using it for? What tools are we using? What are the risks and how can we mitigate them? And we do this stage by stage. So that is what I'm thinking about when I say we need to declare AI use. We need to declare it stage by stage and tell and outline exactly how we mitigate the risk that generative AI introduced in that phase. So given that there's a lot of complexity here, what's our responsibility as the researchers? How do we make sure we're using generative AI ethically, thoughtfully, and well? Well, I like to think of it in terms, I'm going to go back to the mirror metaphor because that's my favorite metaphor. When we're using generative AI, we constantly need to polish that mirror. And that means making sure what generative AI reflects back is clear, honest, and accurate as possible. And that starts with a few key commitments. First, I think, is critical engagement. So we need to avoid the extremes. We don't blindly trust everything that AI produces, but don't dismiss it out of fear or misunderstanding either. Take time to learn what these tools can and can't do, and understand their limits and their built-in biases. So that's step one. Second, there's transparency and disclosure. This one's non-negotiable. I think it shouldn't be negotiable at all. We have to be upfront about how we've used generative AI in research in every single stage. And that means following institutional guidelines or publisher guidelines, which I hope will be updated in the near future. And even when AI is involved, we, the human researchers, and we need to take responsibility for this, are responsible for the final product. And that's, again, non-negotiable. Third is ethical vigilance. We need to be extra cautious when it comes to participant data. That means getting clear consent if there's any chance that AI will be used, and watch closely for algorithmic bias throughout the process. Um, and we constantly have to think about this. Are we, without realizing it, reinforcing any inequities? Fourth is human oversight. We can't outsource our thinking. That's a really, really bad idea. We have to double check everything, the facts, the references, the analysis, the interpretations. Critical thinking is still the most important tool in our research toolkit. And finally, reflexivity. We talk about, well, at least I talk a lot about reflecting on our positionality in relation to our participants. But we also need to reflect on our relationship to the technology itself. How might it be shaping our perspectives, our methods, or even our findings? And I want to be very clear on this. These aren't just boxes that we tick off. It shouldn't go in that direction. These steps that I talk about, they're part of a much bigger ongoing commitment to rigorous ethical scholarship, especially when a time when lines between human and machines are getting blurrier every day. So if we want generative AI to be a tool that supports better research, not just faster research, then this is the work that we have to do. And this is how I think we continuously polish that mirror. All right, last slide. I'm going to go back to the very big question, the larger question I asked in the beginning of the presentation. Is generative AI actually deepening our understanding of education? Is it helping us produce more insightful, rigorous research? Or is it just changing the mechanics, maybe speeding things up, maybe shifting who does what, but not necessarily improving the quality and the depth of what we're producing? And this is where, again, I think the mirror metaphor really matters. Generative AI just doesn't just show us a glimpse of the future. It reflects back on our current practices, our values, even our vulnerabilities as a research community. So it challenges us to look closely and ask, what do we usually value in educational research? Or not usually. What do we actually value in educational research? What does rigor mean when parts of the process can be automated now and in the future? How do we stay ethically grounded when we're working with these tools that carry bias or raise privacy concerns? And more importantly, what makes research meaningful in this new context of generative AI? So in the end, Whether generative AI deepens or distorts our work, that's not really about the technology. It's about us. It depends on how we choose to engage with the technology. It depends on how we approach it. Will we approach it thoughtfully, critically, ethically? Will we stay reflexive on all the parts of research, constantly checking in on how these tools are shaping not just our research, but the way we think and work? Or will we chase convenience, letting speed and ease replace careful, intentional scholarship? I think the answer lies in our choices on how we use this technology, and that responsibility lies, I think, fully and completely with us. Thank you so much for listening. I have my email there. Here's my LinkedIn profile. Please do reach out. I'm happy to engage.